Nick Saban was on Mac and Cube this morning. Greg McElroy and Cole Kubelik are hanging out this week at the Regions Tradition, which is the senior tour event in Birmingham, and a bunch of SEC coaches go play in the Pro-Am there. If you believe Twitter, Nick Saban got a police escort. They stopped traffic to get him into the event today because, of course.
Come on.
Unbelievable. But he sat down with Greg McElroy and Cole Kubelik on the radio this morning from the golf tournament. Obviously, they were going to ask him about the current state of college football. Here is what Nick Saban said, speaking on the imbalances of the sport.
I don't know really it's a rule. I think it's more of a philosophy is, we've always approached college football with everyone being equal. Everybody got the same scholarship. Everybody gets the same Austin money. Everybody gets the same cost of attendance, academic support, medical treatment, whatever it is. It's always been the same. And I think if there are things out there that have created inequalities, right, and how we can maintain that. And I'm all for players being able to make money in name, image, and likeness, and all that. But if they earn it, they deserve it. I'm great with it. But if we create imbalances, right, and I think it will affect the competitive aspects of the game in a way that probably won't be favorable to, fans and the competitive balance that we've always tried to keep. Every league has it, whether you have a salary cap in the NFL,
sure,
whatever it is. Every league has some kind of way to keep a competitive balance, which is, what creates some parity, which is what really makes the game exciting because of the kind of matchups and the kind of games you end up playing.
I'm sorry. I can't help but laugh when that message is delivered from that person. Nick Saban has coached in 9 of the last 13 national championship games. 9 of the last 13 national championship games he coached in. And he talks about parity and imbalance? Of all the people to talk about parity and imbalance, he's the last one I want to hear from. How does he say stuff like that with a straight face?
See, what had happened was, I don't know. I mean, I get what he's saying, at least. I see what he's trying to come across as, but college football, and I will say this, college football, it's not new. It's not new. And it's not even Nick Saban new. College football has always been dominated by the few, right? Oklahoma has been good since the 50s. USC has been good since the 50s. They've taken some steps back. Texas, Alabama. Yeah, they have some years, some cycles where they're down for a few years, but by and large, these teams are always going to be good. It's because they were good first, and they got the head start on everybody else. And, that's kind of where we are. So to say that college football is a sport that's going to have parity is just incorrect. There's never going to be parity in college football. The top dogs will always be on, unless you're going to create. I mean, what he's talking about there with the NFL, like, are you going to create real? You can't have a salary cap because the players are on scholarship. Are you going to create spending caps? You can only spend $100 million on football a year, or $50 million on football a year. Period. That's what your budget is. You can't spend $1 more than that. Doesn't matter if you're Alabama or Akron. That's the only way to achieve any parity in the NFL, or in the college football, I should say.
See, and that's there are people in our business that I don't think can actually think for themselves, because they'll hear Nick Saban say this and be like, "Oh yeah, he's right. Got to change," because Nick Saban said it. Who has benefited more from the old way of college football than that guy, than Nick Saban? Who has benefited more from the old way than him? And if he actually, truly believed in bringing parity to college football, he would have advocated for a cap on analysts. Because Alabama has more of those than anybody else in college football. Why was it not an imbalance then when you could hire more staff than anybody else? Why is it an imbalance now when players are getting paid, but not when you had more assistants on staff than anybody else in college football. Why hasn't he been advocating, like you said, for a cap on budget? What about recruiting budgets? Your recruiting budget is significantly higher than Ole Miss and Mississippi State's, Nick. Why don't you advocate for a cap on that? Oh, it's because it gave him an advantage. That's why people in our business will buy what he's saying, and they shouldn't, because if he actually believed in parity, he wouldn't have taken advantage of all of the advantages that he has had until this happened. But he was winning, and it was easy, and they had the most everything. They had the biggest recruiting budget. They had the most money. He had the most assistants. He had the most support staff. He had the most everything. And now Nick Saban doesn't have the most anymore. Texas A&M has the most. Texas has the most, not Alabama. That's where he's coming from here. He's not trying to save the sport. He's trying to save his grip on the sport. That's what he's doing here. People need to see through this. If this was coming from Will Hall, I would applaud it. Because Will Hall's in a situation where he can't compete. If it came from him, good. Hell, if it came from Lane Kiffin and Mike Leach, good. Because they can't compete. Because Mike Leach can't hire the staff that Nick Saban can hire. Mike Leach doesn't have the recruiting budget, both above board and below board and the in-between board that Nick Saban does. If it was coming from those guys, I'd listen and applaud it because they would be right. When it's coming from the guy that has dominated the sport for the last 15 years, again, he has coached in 9 of the last 13 national championship games. And he's talking about, oh, we got to stop this because of parity? You are the reason there isn't any parity. But now you're losing your grip, and that's why you're talking about it. You should have mentioned it 5 years ago when you could hire more assistants than anybody else. See through this, people. See through this. He's not warning anybody other than his own people when he talks like this.
There you go. I mean, at the same time, though, I don't begrudge him. I don't. Like, you know, he put the machine together. It's rolling. I can't begrudge him the success. You know, anybody who you give them an inch and they take a mile, Nick Saban's the master of it.
Yeah.
The master of it. And so, you know, every fan in America wishes Nick Saban coached their team. And nobody can disagree with that statement.
Josh, I agree with you. You said Alabama's not losing his grip. I agree with you. As long as Nick Saban's there, they're going to keep winning, and they're going to keep winning. What I'm saying is, because of this new age in college football, they don't have the most anymore. Because it's always been about money to some degree. But because there are other programs that he will now compete with that have the ability to give more, that's, to me, where this is coming from. I mean, the year NIL comes, and Texas A&M has the number 1 recruiting class in the history of the sport. Something that Alabama's done every year. They're not doing that anymore. I bet they don't do it next year either. You want to bet it? If Texas has a decent season, you want to bet who's going to have the number 1 recruiting class in college football? Texas. Because they're going to pay for it. Because they got more than Alabama. That's a new thing in this. More of your messages, a lot of good stuff. They've been talking about competitive balance and how we need it to preserve parity because college football had so much of it before NIL got here. Tim in Tupelo says, would your thought process be the same if Nick were at State or Ole Miss? I think I addressed it earlier, but in case you didn't hear it, no, it wouldn't. Because the head coach at Ole Miss and Mississippi State have an argument when they say things like that. It's true when Mike Leach says it. Because Mike Leach, like I said before, cannot spend the way Nick Saban can. He can't hire the staff that Nick Saban can hire. He can't recruit in the same way because his recruiting budget is smaller. And his boosters don't have the NIL capabilities that Nick Saban's do. Now, that's a new thing, but everything else Mississippi State had less of than Alabama. Exact same thing applies to Ole Miss, and dozens upon dozens upon dozens upon dozens of other programs across college football. I absolutely would applaud if Mike Leach, the next time somebody hears from him, says, yeah, we've got to put a stop to this because I can't compete anymore. I couldn't before. I can't. They have more money than me. This is not a level playing field. It hasn't been for a while, and it's still not in the NIL era. This isn't new, though. So let's work on fixing that. I would respect the heck out of it. Ole Miss is spending more on their football coach than they ever have before. They're investing more in the football program than they ever have before. Keith Carter is putting his money where his mouth is, and guess what? It's not Alabama money or anywhere close. It's the wrong messenger. Good message, wrong messenger. And I know you're not supposed to shoot the messengers, but in this case, pew, pew, pew.
You're like Leonidas kicking that guy down the well.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. Those three coaches on the text line can't do those things because they're not at Alabama. Absolutely right. And I agree with this. A couple of you have said things like, well, Alabama, wasn't good. Winning gave him that, all that. Alabama has national championships in its program history. It has more money
Alabama
with or without
won 10
Saban
games
being there.
2 years before he got there. They were 10-2 2 years before Saban took over.
Dabo Swinney would be a better example for you there. Clemson's Clemson because of Dabo. Alabama was Alabama, and Saban's capitalizing on that. It's a phenomenal football coach.
The other side of that coin, too, is that Saban doesn't take the Alabama job unless there are assurances that the things that he wants are going to be there. He could have stayed in Miami another year. God, we all wish he had. But he got assurances from Alabama boosters and staff that, like, hey, when I come in and I ask for this and this and this, it's going to happen, right? And they were like, yes, sir. We want to start winning again. And that's how that's how that deal gets made.
Scott says, preach it. Another message, a little socialism for sports, huh? Hey, I'm not the one complaining about it. It's Nick Saban complaining about it. The richest one of them all.
Yeah.
But that's why I've been a proponent
trickle-down
of
economics from Nick
NIL
Saban.
and everything else. It's kind of why I've been a proponent of that.
At the same time, there is some trickle-down economics in there, and we'll go that route. In that the SEC, as a result of Alabama being so dominant, that has risen. That was the rising tide lifts all ships. I mean, it's literally the rising tide. Alabama being so dominant has put money into the SEC, and because of them, Mississippi State and Ole Miss, their athletic budget has gone from $40 million, $50 million to 60, to 70 to 80 to now over 100. It's going to continue to expand when Texas and Oklahoma get in here. So it has been capitalistic. The problem is, or it's not a problem, but some Mississippi State and Ole Miss are the local mom and pop businesses that are doing a good job and they're making it and they're successful. Alabama is Walmart. They're the top of the line. They're the ones making the most money, and they can afford to, if they ever really want to, they can just crush you. And that's just how it goes.
Another message. He wasn't winning a lot before he came. He won a national championship at LSU. Won a national championship.
It's okay to admit that you don't know about everything. It's okay.
At LSU. I have a hard time doing that. Just ask my wife. I think I'm right about everything. That's kind of the nature. And I remind her, I'm like, hey, my job is to be opinionated about literally everything for hours a day. So this is what you married. You knew going into this that this was me. It's what I'm supposed to do. It's why they pay me the big bucks or something like that. Yeah. Somebody says, I believe he meant, would you feel the same if Mississippi State or Ole Miss had the same budget as Alabama? No, because then the playing field would be equal. I know we don't love the NFL around here. You guys like college football more, but why do you think the NFL is so popular? Why do you think nationally it is so popular? Because everybody in the league has a shot, an equal shot. The Buffalo Bills became a powerhouse at this point overnight. Unattractive market. Not a lot of money. But because of the way they're set up, everybody's got an equal shot. That's not college football. But anyway, Somebody says Ole Miss is paying Kiffin $7 million a year. It's hard to say they're mom and pop. They're not, but compared to Alabama, they are.
Yeah, I mean, you got to look at who they're compared to in the same conference. When you look at their athletic budget versus Alabama's, what is it? There's a gap.
Significant.
Pretty
one.
big gap. And it's going to get bigger when Texas and Oklahoma comes in. Those are two schools that spend more than Ole Miss and Mississippi State.